Have left, and but Mr. Durst is here with Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff. And so, yes, Mr. DeGuerin?
Yes, sir. On this matter of the lawyers, paying the lawyers, we request that the court instruct the jurors now that we applied for and received specific permission from the court to be allowed to arrange for lawyers for Mr. and Mrs. Altman. And the court issued that order.
And explaining that the reason that we needed to do it was because it was surrounding Mr. Durst's attorney-client privilege issues.
So this is something that was in the stipulation, stipulated to come into evidence. It's clearly relevant to her credibility, which her credibility is hugely important, as the court recalls how her testimony progressed. And so it's directly relevant to her credibility, who paid for her attorneys and which side of the aisle she tends to lean towards in terms of who she'd want to protect and not protect.
Well, that's not the question. So I agree with you. It is relevant to her credibility. So the only concern I have that this might go to is some suggestion that counsel were not ethical in this arrangement, and the reason I gave permission was to avoid any potential ethical criticism. I think we're careful. I mean, there have been a few instances where we've been very careful not to let either side suggest or impugn the integrity of the other counsel, and I think that's acknowledged. And sometimes we don't think about how we're bumping into each other. So, Mr. Lewin, with that in mind, do you have any problem with the stipulation? Stipulation?
No, in fact, I apologize.
I would say stipulation rather than instruction.
I left. I told Mr. DeGuerin that it's my understanding we've actually, I don't know that we've officially been told that, although we might have been. If it is correct, which I think it is, that they got permission, then the issue that is important is that it goes to her bias. But I also understand their issue that they want to make sure, because it certainly could look untoward, that it's clear that they have permission to do it. And we're in no way arguing that it's unethical. We're simply arguing that if Bob Durst is paying for her lawyers, she's a biased witness. We have no problem with that. Whatever the court wants to. If the court wants to, I don't even have an issue if the court wants to say that there was some information that was in the videotape that Mr. Durst is paying for the witness's testimony. That is certainly something that you can consider when you evaluate the quality of her testimony. However, just to be clear, the defense had permission from the court to pay for this, and there was nothing illegal. And I don't mind using the term unethical.
So, okay, that's your suggestion, and I'm looking more for a stipulation rather than an instruction right now. Certainly, you can argue the weight of the evidence based on it's a fair argument.
Right on. I was just trying to, by offering to stipulate the instruction, I was just trying to make it. To me, that helps them even more.
I don't want to pinpoint this fact or identify this fact as deserving special instruction, but.
Well, that's what.
As Mr. Lewin described it, in any event, because it flags it for credibility, and you can argue it, but I don't think I should flag it. What I want to do is make sure the jury knows that you've acted ethically.
Right. Well, I want to, yes, and that the jury knows that we applied for to the court. It was ex parte, but we applied for permission to get that, to have attorneys, to compensate for the attorneys that were representing the Altmans in New York and here, and that the court granted that permission, and that it's legal and ethical.
But
write it out for me.
I'm going to write it out because we have to include the reason, Your Honor, that this was all as a result of issues surrounding attorney-client privilege. That's why they needed lawyers. They didn't need lawyers to represent them because they had Fifth Amendment concerns. They needed lawyers because the husband was a lawyer and she worked in the law office.
Well, there was a Fifth Amendment concern, and I thought about, contempt for this
Well, that
this
was,
witness.
that was not when we asked to hire the lawyer. Our intention was strictly
Right.
to litigate the attorney-client issues, Your Honor.
Well,
That's fine, in any event, it was ethical, and I gave permission, so you write something out, if you could stipulate, that'd be
yeah, well,
great.
I'm not gonna, the last part, we will not agree to or
Well,
stipulate to.
we'll see what you do agree to.
Sure. But I told Mr. Guerin, I'm
You
more
won't
than.
agree to the fact that it was that the reason the lawyers were hired was to debate the...
No,
Wait, off the record?
David.
You can have your dialogue off the record, I'm
I
not
won't
making
agree to
this.
that. That's not why I think they were hired.
Okay,
Well,
write it out and put that part in brackets and see if you get agreement to that too. This unredacted transcript and the redacted
Your Honor.
transcript,
Are we
yes,
off the
back on the record.
Or,
Back on the record,
Okay.
I was able to look at the unredacted and redacted transcripts and compare the first 60 pages. I doubt any juror got past that. There's nothing inherently prejudicial about it. It just appropriately excluded. I have told them to disregard anything that wasn't on the video itself.
Thank you, and I just want to apologize and state for the record that we had these copied in 2 batches. We needed additional copies when we found out how many jurors needed them, and for some reason that second batch got printed off of a file that was not redacted, and it should have been checked, and I apologize.
So what is your remedy at this time for, how can we go forward?
So what we suggest is that the transcripts are an aid for the jurors. We do have a redacted copy to mark as an exhibit, and we've subtitled all the videos so that they can actually read on the screen what's going on the TV. My suggestion, if the court is agreeable, is to inquire of the jurors, those that can't read the subtitles for some reason due to their positioning. We do have a few limited, we do have some redacted transcripts we could hand out, or the court could consider reseating jurors who have worse vision to the front and better vision towards the back for this witness only.
Sure, we would also add, and the court pointed it out, a problem with this witness in particular, because of the length, is another issue which the court identified, was that because there are so many breaks and so many parts that are deleted, that the transcripts themselves are very problematic, the handheld ones, because they try to find where they are, and there's no guide that says, oh, skip forward 3 pages, skip forward 6 pages, etc. So I think that also makes it a little bit problematic, and they should really try to rely on what they hear and what's printed on these.
I think what Mr. Lewin is suggesting is that the subtitles are a better aid to the jurors for this particular witness than the actual transcripts. The transcripts can actually be more confusing and distracting for the witnesses.
Yeah, I don't know if jurors will agree with you at the outset, but perhaps enough of them will that let's try. I'm just a little concerned. How many redacted transcripts do we have? And I can volunteer mine.
Oh, shield down.
We have 4, including the court's copy.
4 including mine.
Well, I think the defense has 1 as well, so that would make 5 total.
We could definitely print more, you know, if the defense or somebody needs more. It's just for right now, we could have 5, including the defenses and the courts.
Are you willing to let go of that transcript now, or is it essential for Mr. Chestnut?
We could give them an unredacted one.
I apologize, Your Honor, I was writing a stipulation.
You look, you're going to get an unredacted one now, and you'll more easily be able to discern between the redacted and unredacted portion. So you'll exchange it?
Yes, I don't know if it's been said, and I apologize. We're fine without them having transcripts. Just read what's on the screen.
And that is what I could do.
It's fine, whatever the court wants to do, that's fine with us.
At least for now, we can return to transcripts once we make sure that they're always edited. But my choice right now would be to proceed with the sound and what's on the screens. Because after all, this is just an aid to the jury. It's not a
requirement.
Right.
They do have a transcript on on the tape. All right, we'll give them the sad news that they've got to,
Would the court consider asking if anybody can't see to move them forward, or the subtitle?
You really like yours better, obviously.
I think, I do, well, I said either one.
Okay.
I'll inquire about that. Let's bring our,
We're working on the stipulation,
are you working on the stipulation, which you want?
or the instruction.
Well, do we need to do this, I don't know if we're gonna agree to this, it doesn't have to be, I don't think it has to be contemporaneous anyway.
It really does need to be contemporaneous. The way this is coming across is as if we did something improper by arranging for attorneys for Ms. Altman or for her husband. It's talked about his husband yet, but it needs to be contemporaneous.
Okay? Let's see if we can get them to agree.
It has to have an end.
You want to read Klaus Dillman?
Yeah. We do that.
Do we have
Finish on the fun.
Do we have exhibits for Klaus? Not ready?
We're very close, Your Honor. Okay. John, will you allow it to have the final sentence? I approve, the judge saying I approved of this arrangement?
No, it already said no.
No.
Okay.
Well, you,
No, I mean, I'm already, no.
Okay,
This
just
is
calm.
this is what I'm willing to do.
yeah, but, okay.
Okay, we got it. Up till, let's just,
I understand that you don't want this,
right.
but just to finish it off, I approve of this arrangement.
What?
The judge said.
No, it's simply, they're gonna be told, you are instructed, Mr. Durst applied for permission, blah, blah, blah. And we're granted, this court granted permission, that's it.
You want to put this court instead of passive voice that I'm hearing? This court approved rather than it was approved by,
How about this, Your Honor? You are instructed that the lawyers representing Mr. Durst applied to the court for permission to engage and pay for counsel for Emily Altman and Stuart Altman, and this court granted that permission. There was and is nothing improper, unlawful, or unethical about this arrangement.
was or is?
Was and is nothing.
No.
You
There
sound
was
such,
nothing, is nothing.
you're making me sound like I'm speaking legalese.
Okay.
Was, is, or.
There is
heretofore.
nothing improper. We'll take out the was. I can show it to you if you want.
Yes?
There's
nothing legally improper. I try to speak plain English now that I am not a lawyer anymore. Representing Mr. Durst.
It doesn't matter anywhere.
Counsel for Emily Altman and Stuart Altman, and this court granted that permission. There's nothing improper, unlawful, or unethical about this arrangement. Beautiful, got it, done. Right?
What's that?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll instruct him.
Thanks, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. No problem.
Okay, let's get him.
The next time I want unethical.
And alternates have returned. So ladies and gentlemen, obviously we had a problem with some of these transcripts. The transcript the accurate transcript that we need to utilize is on the screen. So most of you have been following the transcript on the screen if you're at times when you're unable to hear. Some of you have enjoyed having a transcript also, but there won't be one ready this afternoon. Is there anyone who cannot read this anyone of the jurors and alternates who cannot read that screen from where you sit.
If I move up, I could probably.
Is there anyone willing to switch seats? So thank you. Juror number 2, for this afternoon only, we'll have you switch with juror number 8, and juror number 8, for the record, is the one who brought this to our attention. Thank you. And will we have transcripts on Monday?
Yes.
So on Monday, we'll have transcripts that are correct transcripts for everyone who needs them, or at least for those of you who ordinarily use them. So that's part 1. Secondly, there's an issue I want to instruct you about, because it's something that came up in that testimony I think I ought to address, and that is, you are instructed that the lawyers representing Mr. Durst applied to the court for permission to engage and pay for counsel for Emily Altman and Stuart Altman. And this court granted that permission. There is nothing improper, unlawful, or unethical about this arrangement. So with that, we'll return to the video. Mr. Henderson, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. We've got about 5 minutes into day 1. Day 1 is only 6 minutes or so. So we'll finish day 1 and start day 2. Day 2 is going to be an hour and 23 minutes.
Let's go to your California lawyers. How was it that you ended up retaining your California lawyers?
One of the attorneys involved, and they gave us a list of the attorneys in the city.
Let me stop you. When you say one of the attorneys involved, who are you referring to?
Chris Garcia.
So when you say one of the attorneys, meaning attorneys working for Mr. Durst, is that correct?
Yes.
And was it your understanding that you were being sent to these lawyers by Mr. Durst?
Can you answer?
Yes, sir.
You may answer.
The last meeting, Mr. Durst. Mr. Can you repeat the question, please?
I'm asking, was your understanding that when you received a call from one of Mr. Durst's lawyers telling you to pick one of these LA lawyers, that it was Mr. Durst, through his attorneys, who was directing you to get the LA lawyer?
I don't know what Mr. Durst said to his attorney.
Did you believe at the time you were sent to one of these LA attorneys that Mr. Durst's lawyers were operating and contacting you in the course of their representation of Mr. Durst?
No. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
It's okay.
Okay, we're going to assume tomorrow at 10 a.m. the order to return. Ms. Altman, you may be seated. You remain under oath. And I will allow your own lawyer to take her on board here for the purpose of establishing the nature of her relationship.
Permission to proceed, Joe?
You may.
Thank you. Ms. Altman, what's your husband's name? And when did you marry?
1973.
And what is Stuart Altman's profession?
He's a gentleman.
And does he have a law office?
Yes.
And where is that located?
In the only room.
And when did he establish his law office?
In 1995.
Are there any other lawyers in his law firm besides him?
No.
Does your husband have any employees in his law firm? Just you? When did you start as an employee of his law firm?
1995.
Are you still to this day an employee of his law firm?
Yes.
So, Rosie, do you mind just clarifying, you said how many employees would that exist? Has that been since she's been there in 95 or just now?
Okay, very well. Between 1995 and the present day, have there been any other employees other than you at that law firm? No. Now, what are your various job functions as an employee of your husband's law firm? And why don't we say, starting in 95, and if it's changed, you can let us know.
I keep his calendar. I provide his files 2 weeks in advance, and he gives us 2-week letters, and he reviews cases 2 weeks in advance. And we send letters, I answer his phone, sometimes I talk to clients. When the clients come in, sometimes I talk to them. When he has clients in jail, and he's out of the office, they talk to me.
What kind of practice does he have? And by that I mean, what's the nature, substance of the types of cases that he has? And can you tell us from 1995 to the present, and if it's changed, let us know that.
He represents the labor union, and since 1995 he's done family court work and criminal court work in Nassau County.
Is he on any panels?
He's on the Nassau County criminal panel and the New York City Police family court panel.
As a result of being on those panels, can you characterize whether his workload or caseload is light, heavy, or anything in between?
Pretty heavy.
I think I'm going to have you actually scoot back from the microphone slightly, just slightly. Okay, go ahead.
Because of that caseload involving dependency cases, I think you said family cases, and criminal cases, how often is he in the office between, Monday and Friday?
Hardly ever.
Hardly ever. And when he is out of the office, who is the person responsible for any client contacts? Are those client contacts, do those client contacts that you're talking about include telephones and meetings?
Telephones and some meetings, yes.
Now, as part of your employment, can you tell us what kind of interaction, what's the nature of the interaction you have with the clients of the law firm?
When they call the office, I'm usually the one to speak to them first, and they'll tell me what their issues are, and if I can help them with something simple, I do. Otherwise, when I speak to my husband, either on his lunch break or at night, I give him the messages and then he'll call them back.
And how would you characterize your role with respect to whether or not you communicate with the clients on behalf of or not for your husband regarding the substance of their cases?
I pretty much know a lot about most of his cases, and when the clients call, if they want to know if they have to file a custody petition or when they have to be in court, I can handle that. It was filing a motion or orders for cause about something that's happened immediately that someone is going to do.
Now, I want to go back to something you said a few minutes earlier, and that is letters. With respect to the typing of letters, what is your role?
I type them all.
I'm going to ask you then, with respect to the communications you've advised us about and the nature of your role, would you say it's the same or different with respect to Mr. Durst?
I say it's the same.
Now, as part of your employment, okay. Do you know who your husband's clients are? Since the law firm opened in 1995, do you have personal knowledge whether or not Mr. Durst is a client or not of your husband?
Mr. Durst is a client.
And has he been a client since 1995 and to the present?
Yes.
There were several times that he was incarcerated, starting in 2001. I think he was incarcerated in Galveston, in Pennsylvania, and New Orleans. Do you have any understanding during those time periods whether or not Mr. Durst was a client of your husband's?
He was.
During those time periods Mr. Durst was incarcerated, did you have either phone calls or meetings with him?
Yes.
For what purpose?
I would speak to Mr. Durst in a different way than my husband did, but it was to try to calm him down, make him feel better, try to, just generally assist my husband in helping Mr. Durst.
And how would your conversations with Mr. Durst assist your husband in his role as his attorney?
Trying to calm him down sometimes and getting to focus on what Stuart needed to talk to him about.
And what did you understand your husband's role to be with respect to Mr. Durst on these numerous cases since 2001?
He was a counselor and a trusted advisor.
And why do you say he was a trusted advisor?
Because my husband and Bob have known each other for a really long time, and whenever Bob was in trouble, he turned to Stuart. Because he trusted him.
Did you understand that your husband had any role with respect to Mr. Durst's legal team and advising Mr. Durst with respect to decisions along the way? What was your understanding?
Early on, Bob would talk to Stuart about, various attorneys and then strategy, court strategy, interviewing strategies.
And why was your husband, if it was your understanding, why wasn't your understanding that your husband was essential to those decisions in that role?
Because they had a long history. And I think Bob trusted Stuart, and Stuart cares about Bob.
Now, during some of these meetings and phone calls that you had, were you aware that there were notices of being recorded?
Yes, he was.
With respect to being notified they were being recorded, what was your understanding as to whether or not those conversations that you were having were confidential or not, despite the recording?
I thought they were confidential because Stuart was listed as one of Bob's attorneys. I thought it would be confidential.
And I'm going to show you a letter that's marked as Exhibit I. Your Honor, the prosecution has a copy of it. May I approach the witness with a copy? I have an extra for the court.
We'll mark it differently, though. Robin, it was an Exhibit I motion that they filed. So for our purposes, this is a motion by the real court's exhibit, maybe?
Yeah.
Court's one?
Yeah.
We'll let you call it court's one.
Okay. Your Honor, I have two copies. There's an extra for the court, but only one has the in-camera Exhibit I on the bottom of it. Otherwise, they're identical.
All right, thank you. Should I approach the clerk for a moment? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you can reject it also. Oh. That's working, I think. There you go. See it in your head? Yeah,
Big enough for you to see? Okay.
And if you, and bring the microphone, so make sure you speak into the microphone if you speak, if you need to while you're looking at it.
Where is the microphone?
Her microphone. Her microphone. You don't have a microphone.
Oh, okay.
I think it orders microphone.
Mrs. Altman, do you recognize this letter?
Yes, we do.
And what about this letter helps you to recognize it?
Well, it was the letter to,
You told us earlier you typed your husband's letter.
I mean, my initials are on the bottom.
And where do you see your initials?
On the left.
And they are what?
SNA is the Stuart Noel Altman, and UK is Emily Jones.
And why do you use the initials EK?
It's an amazing name.
And did you prepare this letter for your husband notifying NCIS that he was his lawyer and you didn't want the conversations between his lawyer recorded?
Thank you.
Now, would you have discussed matters with Mr. Durst while he was incarcerated, either in meetings or on the phone, if you needed him to be revealed to the district attorney? I'm going to show you one other exhibit, Exhibit A. Your Honor, similarly.
We'll call it 2.
2, thank you. I've also provided it to the district attorney, and the court will have a copy delivered. Maybe one of those copies I can have for the screen, actually. And this is Altman. Are you still with us? I'm going to show you page 1 of Exhibit A, affirmation of
2. Court's 2.
Exhibit 2. What did I say? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Your Honor. Exhibit 2, this is page 1, and I'm going to show you Exhibit 2, page 2. Do you recognize the signature on the second page?
Yes, I do.
And do you recognize this affirmation?
Yes, I do.
How is it that you recognize it?
I'm thankful.
And in the affirmation, it says that, at paragraph 4, that over the years I've been Mr. Durst's legal advisor and attorney in many civil matters, real estate matters, landlord, tenant, and criminal. In particular, I've been advising Mr. Durst in reference to criminal matters since 2001 and continuously to the present. You typed that paragraph as well, right?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree with it?
Yes, I do.
Is there anything in the declaration you don't agree with?
No.
He notes at paragraph 5 that you are his wife and have been working in his office since '95 as his secretary, office manager, and the only employee, and has taken part in conversations and correspondence with many clients, including Robert Durst. That goes over to paragraph 6. You agree with that?
Yes.
Your Honor, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bednar. And Mr. Lewin, you may resume your examination.
Can I have one moment, please?
Yes, you may. All right, Mr. Lewin, you may proceed.
Ms. Altman, I'm going to be asking you serious questions. If there's anything you don't understand, you can't hear, you're confused about, just let me know. Okay? All right? And also, you need to answer out loud, because the court reporter's got to take down what you're saying.
Okay.
Do you understand? Great. I can hear you better today. Are you less nervous than you were yesterday?
No.
I sharpened my stinger right before I got in here, so I'm good to go. As you sit here, Ms. Altman, do you consider yourself to be what we could be characterized as a neutral, unbiased witness?
I told my answers to you were truthful.
Okay, and I appreciate that answer. It's just not the question I asked you. Did you understand the question?
Obviously, I have a relationship with godfather, but again, I think I'm going to be honest with you and truthful with you.
Okay, so would you concede, Ms. Altman, that in coming in here, in testifying, you want Bob Durst to be acquitted?
I hope that if Bob did not do what you're accusing him of, that he's been found not guilty.
Let me ask the question again. If he did do what he is charged with, do you want him to be convicted? Ma'am, so this is what I'm asking you. And again, as you sit here, would you agree that Robert Durst is one of them?
Yeah, you were. Come on. Sure.
Is all you need a minute? Okay. As you sit here, would you agree that Robert Durst is one of your oldest and dearest friends?
Yes.
So again, if you could please answer this question I'm asking. If he did what he's accused of, do you want him to be convicted?
If he's proven to do what you're accusing him of, then I guess he has to be found guilty.
Okay. Again, ma'am, it's very important if you listen to the question. I'm not asking you what will happen, what you think will happen. I'm saying as you sit here right now, isn't it true that no matter what, you do not want Robert Durst to be convicted in this case?
That's not true. No, if he's guilty of what you're saying he's guilty of, then yes, he deserves to be punished for it.
And do you want him to be convicted? Would you agree, Ms. Altman, that as you sit here today, given the many years you've known Mr. Durst, that it is incredibly difficult for you to even comprehend that your close friend could be a murderer?
Absolutely.
And would you agree that you have a vested interest, because he's your close friend, in not wanting to believe that unless you absolutely have to?
Are you asking me if I find it difficult to believe that you could do something like that?
Well, that's what
I'm sorry.
Okay, let me ask you again. So as you sit here, would you agree that given the closeness of your relationship with him, that you have an interest in not wanting to believe that he could have committed the murder that he's charged with in this case?
I don't want to believe that he committed this crime.
If in fact he did commit this crime, if he killed Susan Berman, would that cause you to question how well you ever knew Mr. Durst to begin with?
Oh,
Do you want me to ask the question again?
If you can answer.
Okay, if Mr. Durst, if it were proven that he murdered Susan Berman, would that cause you to question to yourself how well you ever really knew her? Please.
I don't think that you can judge a person's entire life by one act.
Now, would you agree that you are aware that I've been wanting to interview you for the past 2 years?
Yes.
And do you agree that, pursuant to your rights, you have declined the interview? Can you explain why you wouldn't sit down and be interviewed by myself and investigators?
My husband is one of Bob's attorneys. I was advised by attorneys not to speak to unless I had to.
Now, isn't it true that the reason that you gave through your attorney, Mr. Macklin, do you know who Mr. Macklin is?
Yes.
M-A-C-K-L-I-N, for not agreeing to be interviewed, was that simply you were exercising your right not to speak with us, and that he mentioned for you nothing about any privilege you had. Would you agree?
Yes.
Ma'am, do you agree that you fought the subpoena in New York and only agreed to come and testify here when you lost in New York?
Yes.
Now, you've been asked various questions by your attorney regarding your work history. Do you have another job in addition to working for Stewart? How many hours a week have you worked for Stewart since 1996?
I can't. I don't know.
Okay, so Ken, ma'am, let's go back to the period in 1996 when you began working for Mr. Altman. How many hours a week did you work for him?
It varies. You know, sometimes we're married and we work at home and in his office, sometimes 20, sometimes 40. We have motions to do, sometimes more than that.
Did you have a set work schedule with him?
No.
And were there times when Mr. Altman, in essence, served as his own secretary?
No.
So, during 1996, you said, this period of time, and I'm going forward, you said the time varied. Was that true when we get up to the year 2000? Did your work schedule change at all?
It varied. It varied from day to day, week to week.
Well, that's what I'm asking you, ma'am. Between 1996, when you described what your work schedule is, and today, did you have the same work schedule where you had the range of, you explained, approximately 20 to 40 hours a week?
Yeah, it's the same.
What's that?
It's the same.
You have a job at a temple, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
When did you get that job?
In this particular temple?
Well, let's go back to 1996. When you first went to work for Stewart, did you have another job? At some point, did you get a second job?
Yes.
When was that?
Maybe around 1998, 1999.
And the second job you got, what was that?
I helped kids prepare for their bar mitzvahs.
And was that a formal job where you ended up having a certain amount of hours per week?
They were flexible.
And when you got that job, approximately how many hours per week would you work?
8.
About 8 hours a week? And I would assume in doing that preparation, people would have to make appointments with you in advance.
Yes.
And in studying for that celebration, is it fair to say that you were not really in a position to say to them, hey, listen, I'm busy with my husband today, I can't help you?
They had set 20-minute lessons with me on specific days.
And so during those days, you were not able to work for Stewart when you had these other lessons, is that correct?
Correct.
You said that was your first additional job, is that correct? Oh, you need to answer yes or no.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. And in terms of that job, did the hours stay the same, about 8 hours a week?
It depends on the amount of kids that are prepared for the name that year.
Well, so I'm asking for a range.
I think between 6 and 12.
Between 6 and 12. You indicated that you ended up having, assume another job, a different job at a later point, is that right?
Well, the temples merged, so it's a different temple.
Oh, okay. So you worked for one temple, the temples merged, and then you went to work for the second temple.
Yes.
And when did that merger occur?
2010, I think 2009 or 2010.
And was your work in the range of 8 to 12 hours per week between the time you got the job in 2010 or 12, whenever it was the temples merged?
Yes.
You were asked questions about the cases that your husband handled when you worked for him. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
Do you have any legal training yourself?
No.
Would you ever interview clients on your own without Stewart's involvement?
Sometimes we give you a list of questions to ask clients, and then I would, write out the answers and give them to them if you weren't able to be there.
For the most part, is it fair to say that your dealings with clients, other other than when they would call you, but your dealings with clients were when Stewart was there.
Stewart met a lot of, it's a difficult question because Stewart is in trial a whole lot of time. Okay? He's a trial lawyer, mostly, at least with his union. So I was like the first contact these people had, unless they were important.
When you say you're the first contact, is it fair to say that when someone contacts you and they're going to retain your husband, that you're going to take care of the administrative stuff?
Yes.
Retainer letter and explaining what they have to pay, etc. Is it also fair to say that you're not going to be giving those clients legal advice?
No.
You know, I asked to spell negative, which is my mistake.
I'm sorry, okay.
No, it's mine. Did you give them legal advice in those meetings? Yes.
No, unless Stewart said, tell Jane Doe that she needs to file, you know, another motion or another custody appearance. But that was Stewart telling me to tell them so.
So you would not independently discuss with your husband's clients legal issues unless specifically directed by your husband to do so?
That's correct.
Were you aware and did you have knowledge of the issue of confidentiality with the clients you spoke to?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that I assume you would have known that if a client told you something that was confidential, do you know what a confidential communication is?
Yes.
I have to ask these things. If a client were to make a confidential communication to you, would you have known that that communication could not be repeated to anybody other than the lawyer without the client's authorization?
Yes.
And would you have known that had you done something like that, you would have been violating ethical duties that you had as an agent of your husband?
Yes.
Would you have known that by doing that, you would have been jeopardizing potentially your husband's license and his reputation in terms of the proper handling and dissemination of confidential information?
Yes.
I'll let people in the audience get a head start on the cafeteria lines. That's very relevant. And excuse you at this time. And then we'll have this very brief closed session, resuming it, and we'll resume at 1:30. Yes, the closed session is counsel for the witness and for the defense and for other people. Otherwise, I'll ask everyone to leave.
And again, the clerks and the representatives are okay?
Yes. Yeah. Ms. Altman has resumed witness stand. Durst is present with his attorneys, the people represented by Mr. Durst and other counsel. And we have Mr. McLean and Ms. Bednarski representing Ms. Altman. Ms. Altman, you remain under oath, and you may continue with your examination.
Ms. Altman, how long have you known Robert Durst?
45 years.
And did you meet him through your husband, Stewart?
Yes.
And when did you and Stewart first start dating?
Gosh, 1971, 1972.
So I'm just doing the math. So would that mean that you met Bob Durst shortly after you started dating your husband?
Yes.
And you know what, I should have asked before I didn't. Your age, we just needed for the additional examination.
How old are you?
I'm 53.
Okay.
Do you know how it was that Stewart and your husband, Stewart and Bob Durst met?
They went to high school together.
And if I were to ask you, in terms of what you observed, Stewart's closest friends, where would Bob Durst rank?
I don't know when he was friendly in high school, so I really can't barely answer that.
No, just want to ask you, as it sits today, put it this way, is it fair to say that Bob Durst is one of your husband's closest friends?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that Bob Durst is also one of your closest friends?
Yes?
If I were to ask you whether your relationship with Bob Durst is more personal or professional, what would your answer be?
At this stage?
Yes.
Right now, we want to help my husband.
Meaning more professional? Yes. Is it fair to say that you referred to Bob Durst in the past as family?
I don't remember.
If I were to ask you, you consider Bob Durst to be family, what would be your response?
I consider him a very close friend.
If I were to tell you that Robert Durst had referred to you and your husband as, quote, his oldest friends, would that be consistent with your position and agreement about the relationship?
Yes.
Have you always had a relationship with Bob Durst that is separate from his relationship? Talking about personal.
Separate from my husband?
In other words, do you talk to him on your own? Do you see him on your own sometimes?
Well, I usually refer to us as a stew-in. Or stew-in.
Okay.
Okay, go like one person. Do I talk to him separately from my husband? We're kind of a package deal.
Well, so, Ms. Altman, so are you saying that you don't engage in separate phone calls frequently with Mr. Durst that your husband is uninvolved with?
No.
Have you ever traveled with Bob Durst?
Yes?
Over the years, how often would you say that you and your husband socialized?
You mean from the time that I met him?
I'm not asking you to give me a number, I'm saying how often. We all have, say he's a close friend. We all have people that we hardly see, we have people that we see and talk to frequently.
Depending on the year, we would speak frequently, no infrequently. There were times when we had no contact for 3 years.
And have you traveled with Mr. Durst?
Yes.
And where have you traveled together?
We traveled once together to Puerto Rico.
Is that the only trip that you take with Mr. Durst?
Yes.
I want to mark as people's, I think it's going to be 21. This is going to be page 144401 discovered. Oh, it's up. Ms. Altman, did you recognize the people in this photograph?
Yep.
Can you tell me who that is?
It's me, Stu, and Bob.
Bob's in the middle, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me where that picture's taken?
I think it's Puerto Rico.
And do you recall approximately when that would have been? Well,
Years ago.
Well, so we've seen pictures, when you say years ago, that's not Bob Durst in the 1970s or 1980s, correct? So if you could estimate based on...
1990s, 2000.
Who paid for that trip?
Bob.
Is it your position that that was a trip that was pursuant to any representation that was being done by your husband?
I think it was after he was released from Galveston, and it was, he wanted to thank you for the help in Galveston, made me think.
Ma'am,
You're asking that, and I honestly don't remember.
ma'am, I'm going to ask you again. Bob Durst takes you and your husband to Puerto Rico, correct? Said yes, he pays for it, correct?
Yes.
I'm asking you, was that part of your representation of Robert Durst?
I said I thought it was mostly as a thank you to Stewart's representing him and helping him out of Galveston.
When you were in Puerto Rico, any idea how much money that trip cost, Mr. Durst?
No,
Did you pay for anything?
I don't know.
Have you ever paid for a trip for Bob Durst?
The trip, no.
Have you bought, is your relationship with Bob Durst, is it a situation where your personal relationship, you guys kind of buy each other gifts back and forth?
You mean birthday cards, you mean birthday presents, you know.
course of your relationship, is it your position that you and your husband, Bob Durst, exchange monetary gifts with each other?
And so did you give monetary gifts to each other? Any other kind of gifts?
Birthday gifts sometimes, birthday cards.
What gifts have you given to Mr. Durst?
Over the years, I don't remember.
Yeah, you don't remember. So, have you ever given Mr. Durst a gift, say, worth more than $1,000?
No.
Has Mr. Durst ever given you a gift more than $1,000?
Me personally?
You or your husband?
Yes.
What was that?
A card years and years ago? Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm asking you, ma'am. I'm not afraid.
That's
I'm
the
asking you.
now.
So, you said he bought you a car. When was this?
2002?
If I said 2001, the end of 2001, does that make sense?
You sure?
What kind of car was it?
A Lexus.
What kind of Lexus?
A Lexus.
Was it a $40,000 to $50,000 Lexus?
I don't know.
Does that refresh your recollection, ma'am?
I didn't participate in that conversation. I thought it was something from you showed me that. I know this story. Yeah.
Ma'am, so does it refresh your recollection that Mr. Durst purchased a $40,000 to $50,000 Lexus ES300 Millennium Silver Metallic with light charcoal leather interior?
Does that refresh your recollection? Does that help you remember how much the car's worth?
No.
Is it your position that this gift of the Lexus was a part of the attorney-client representation of Mr. Durst?
I never asked.
Well, ma'am, who handles your tax returns? Do you know, ma'am, if we were to go back to 2001, would you have declared this vehicle, you and your husband, as income relating to your work on an attorney-client matter with Mr. Durst?
I don't know.
So you're saying you have no idea, ma'am, whether or not you and your husband wrote off this car as income, declared it as income, excuse me, when you did your taxes?
I don't remember.
Well, ma'am, do you believe, based on what you have said, that this was related to the representation, that this should have been then declared as income because it was part and parcel of the representation of you and your husband, Mr. Durst?
What I said was, it was the gift. You asked me if I knew how much it was, and I honestly did. Then you asked me if it was on my taxes for 2001, and I honestly don't know.
Ma'am, so what I'm asking you is, let me make it real clear. Would you agree that that vehicle had nothing to do with your attorney-client relationship with Mr. Durst and was a gift he was giving to his friend?
I think his said it was a gift.
So the answer to my question would be yes, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you recall if, after you got the vehicle, if you and your husband added a $600 phone? Do you recall if you and your husband added a $600 phone, which you had Bob Durst through his wife, Debbie Charity, pay for?
I don't remember. I don't remember who paid for it, when it was stuff.
Have you and your husband ever bought a car for Bob Durst?
No.
How many other clients that you had have bought cars for you?
No.
How many other clients that you had have given gifts of this magnitude to you?
No.
So I said, how many clients? None. Have you traveled on vacation to places like Puerto Rico on the dime of your clients other than Mr. Durst?
No.
So when you said before that the professional relationship, you told this to your attorney, Mr. Durst, your answer was, and I'm paraphrasing, it was just like his other clients. Do you recall saying that? Well, this was today, ma'am, So let me lay it out for you. You testified, and I'm paraphrasing, you were asked by your lawyer if your relationship, professional relationship with Mr. Durst, and either in the question or the response, you confirmed that in essence, yes, our professional relationship with Bob Durst was just like our other clients. Do you recall saying that?
Yes, and now I can explain to you. Other clients, most 90%, 99% of Stewart's clients don't have the money that Mr. Durst has. So, you know, no, we didn't go out, we didn't travel with him or anything.
Ma'am, how many other clients that Stewart Altman has do you say I love you to?
One or two.
Out of how many clients?
50, 60.
Wait, 50 or, ma'am, in the 20 some odd years that you worked for your husband, you're talking about he's 50 or 60 clients total?
Over the whole time, I can't give you a number over.
Probably thousands of clients, correct?
I can't give you a number.
And ma'am, you're saying that maybe 2 or 3 you said I love you and I miss you too, is that correct?
I didn't say, you didn't ask me that I miss you. You said, you know, when you say, well, it's not a romantic love, it's a friendship thing.
Ma'am, that's my point. It is a friendship thing with Mr. Durst, isn't it?
It doesn't mean that my husband doesn't represent me, that I don't help my husband. You can care about people you represent.
So ma'am, your position is that your relationship with Mr. Durst is based simply on the fact that he is a client of your husband and that your relationship professionally with Mr. Durst is just like his other clients. Is that your testimony?
No.
Okay. How is it different?
Okay. My husband and Mr. Durst have known each other for over 60 years. Okay? They were friends. When Bob needs counsel, he needs an attorney, he turns to Stewart because they trust each other. There's a built-in trust for friendship that's been over years and years and years. And he trusts him as a friend and as an attorney. So my relationship with Bob, based on my relationship with my husband, is kind of intertwined between friendship and helping my husband and counseling Bob sometimes.
And so what I just wanted to establish was, you had said before that the relationship, professional relationship with Bob Durst was just like his other clients. You now appear to be conceding that that's not correct.
No. When Stewart acts in his capacity as an attorney, okay, whether it's for Bob Durst or any other client, it's the same. He has a union that he represents, okay, and we go out to dinner with him. There's a certain, call me when he's the right word, but I can't think of another word right now. Where when you're representing someone, you have a personal relationship with several of your clients, many of your clients. And that's just the way it is with Bob. When he isn't in legal trouble, you know, he's more of a friend. When he's in trouble like this, then Stewart is more of an attorney to counsel.
So now I'm talking about you and your relationship. So would you agree that your relationship with Bob Durst, professionally, is different than any other client your husband has ever had?
No. I just said to you, when he represents a union, okay? And we go out to dinner with some of the union officials. We're friendly with some of them. We socialize with some of them.
How many of those union officials have taken you to Puerto Rico?
None.
How many bought you Lexuses?
None.
You don't find a difference, ma'am, between the relationship that you have with Bob Durst professionally and the relationship that you have with your husband's union clients. Your testimony is basically the same. Is that correct?
I think that the union officials that my husband represents and the representation of Robert Durst and my relationship in both of those areas are pretty much similar. Just because Bob may have more money doesn't mean that he would be treated, that the other thing would be treated any better or worse.
No, ma'am, the question is not how you're treating other people. I'm simply trying to inquire from you that no matter how much these other clients have, Bob Durst is the only person, the only client that's taking you on vacation to Puerto Rico and buying you expensive cars.
Or yes.
Who's Howard Altman? How old is your son?
41.
Where was he born?
He was born in Manhattan.
Was he born at Cornell Hospital?
Yes.
Who was there with you and Howard when he was born?
My husband,
Who else?
Bob and Kathy.
When you say Bob, you mean Bob Durst.
I'm sorry, Bob Durst and Kathy Durst.
How many of Stewart's union clients were there at the birth of your son?
He didn't represent the unions at that time.
Okay, how many other clients that he had were present for the birth of your son?
None.
Can you tell me, are there pictures that you have shown to Dateline, to a producer, to Mr. Dean, that show, in fact, Bob and Kathy the day that your son was born?
Yeah.
And I just want to establish, on that day, you were not working for your husband and engaged in attorney-client communications with Mr. Durst, am I correct?
You're correct.
Does Howard have a godfather?
Yes.
Can you explain what's a godfather in your definition?
A godfather is someone, in our understanding, if both parents are not able to take care of a child, then it would be the responsibility of the godfather or godmother to do that.
How significant of a position do you view personally as the appointment of a godfather for your only child?
It's important.
Fair to say it's about as important an honor as you could bestow on somebody?
It's important. You know, there are...
Who's godfather to your son?
Bob Durst. Just passionate. Bob Durst is my son's godfather.
And were you asked about your relationship with Mr. Durst in the particular context of how he was named godfather when you were interviewed by Aaron Moriarty from 48 Hours back in 2003 or 2004?
I don't remember.
I'd like to play, this is going to be LADA 088990, code EH411. I'm going to play an audio clip of Ms. Altman.
Okay.
Go ahead. If you're on, we'll mark this. How does the court want this marked? You can go as
22 and 22A.
Okay, 22 and 22A. Thank you, Ryan.
It's a heavy responsibility to send someone, will you be my child's godfather? It's not something to do lightly. And we chose Bob because we had the kind of thing that anything ever happened to us, Bob would be there to take care of our sons. And I still believe the same way about him now.
Ma'am, who was that voice?
Me.
Do you recall making that statement?
Now that I've seen it,
And is it fair to say, ma'am, that the appointment of the godfather was incredibly, you called it a heavy responsibility, correct?
yes,
And it's not something you do lightly, correct?
correct.
And you said you chose Bob because of the kindest faith that if anything happened to us, Bob would be there to take care of our son, correct? And ma'am, you said, and I still believe the same way about you now, correct?
Yes.
Ma'am, that occurred years after Kathy Durst's disappearance, correct?
What was the year? I'm sorry.
This interview was 2003 or 2004.
Okay.
Did that occur years after Kathy Durst's disappearance?
Yes.
It occurred after Susan Berman's murder, correct?
Yes.
And ma'am, it occurred after Mr. Durst had admitted that he had killed and dismembered his neighbor, correct?
I thought it was not guilty.
Now, do you know who Morris Black is?
Yes.
Now, when you found out that Bob had dismembered his neighbor, what was your response?
I didn't understand it.
Well, when you first heard, ma'am, that Mr. Durst dismembered his neighbor, did you believe that that could have happened to Bob Durst, you know?
No.
And you would agree that as you sit here today, ma'am, that is not an issue that's in dispute. In other words, no one's going to stand up here and tell you Bob Durst didn't dismember Morris Black. You know for a fact that that's what he did, correct?
Yes.
when you found out that he had dismembered Morris Black, did that disturb you?
Yes.
Right now, you stated, you saw yourself up there. Bob would be there to take care of our son, and I still believe the same way about him now. You just watched that, correct?
Yes.
That's in 2003 or 2004. That is after you knew that Mr. Durst had dismembered a body, correct?
Yes.
So, ma'am, is it fair to say then that you finding out that Mr. Durst had dismembered a body was not enough to change your opinion about whether or not Bob was a suitable person to take care of the heavy responsibility of being godfather to your child?
I never asked Bob how he came to dismember Mr. Black. Okay. The Bob Durst that was named godfather to my son was a really good person when it came to my son. You have to take acts, and you can't judge a whole person by one act. I can't do it, I'm sorry. And yes, he was godfather to my son, and my son's older now, and thank God doesn't need anyone. But, I certainly wasn't going to say about, no, you're not godfather anymore.
Well, ma'am, so what I'm trying to establish is you said you don't want to judge somebody by one act. I previously asked you if it was shown that Mr. Durst had murdered Susan Berman. We went through that hypothetical. Your response was one act that somebody does isn't going to change my opinion. I then brought up the situation with Kathy Durst. You didn't directly answer that. It turned out that Mr. Durst had killed his wife, Kathy. And now I brought up the third issue, which is Mr. Durst admittedly dismembering the corpse of his friend. And the fact that after those incidents, that your response was still, after that has not changed your opinion. And I just want to get established from you that as you sit here today, that you have an affinity and a liking and a love for Bob Durst that basically supersedes any act that he may or may not have committed. Is that correct?
It's not true. You asked me if Bob killed Susan Berman, does he deserve to be punished? Yes, if he killed someone, he deserves to be punished. What happened with Morris Black was apparently a fight between two people. I don't know, I wasn't there. But apparently something happened and Morris Black died. I wasn't there. I honestly don't know what happened.
We're back in session, and people versus Robert Durst, Mr. Durst is present, people's lawyers, the people represented. The witness, Altman, has returned. You remain under oath. You may continue with your examination, Mr.
Have you ever asked Bob Durst for help getting your son a job?
Yes.
I want to ask you if you, in essence, had the following exchange with Mr. Durst. Have you told anybody that you called Bob for help on something because your son was out of work and you wanted to know if Bob knew somebody in a law firm that would hire your son? Did you relate to Bob Durst during a conversation about getting your son a job, asking for help, that you were very upset with him because you never asked him for a favor and you always got out of the limb for him? Have you ever said that?
I probably said something like that, yes.
Okay. And did you say something to the effect of also, I put my reputation on the line and gone on TV and said he's a wonderful man, but he wouldn't even help me?
I don't think that's those exact words.
Well, when you see it's his exact words, did you say something within that same meaning, in essence?
I always said what you said, you could tell me.
And did you say something to the effect of that you put your reputation on the line by going on TV?
I don't remember.
Well, so if you don't remember whether you said it or not, would that express the views as you hold them? Do you understand what I'm saying, ma'am?
No.
Okay, so ma'am, what I'm asking you is, are you saying, you know what, I don't remember saying that, and that's not something I would have said, or are you saying, I just don't remember saying that?
No, I'm saying I don't remember the exact words that you used. My son was out of the job. I had asked Bob if he knew anyone. He didn't. And Andrew directly said he was going to try, but he couldn't, and that's what happened.
So when Mr. Jarecki related that you had said, I was very upset because I never asked Bob for a favor, does that accurately capture that sentence, how you felt? Let me answer my question. Can you say it again?
Yes.
You have that look. Mr. Jarecki has said that you responded, I was very upset because I never asked Bob for a favor. Does that accurately reflect, forgetting about the exact words, how you felt?
I don't remember using those exact words with Mr. Jarecki.
Ma'am, listen to my question. I'm not asking about exact words. I'm saying, were you upset when Bob Durst told you, well, the law firms that I use aren't hiring?
Yes.
Okay. Did you also say to Mr. Jarecki something to the effect of, I put my reputation on the line, went on TV and said he's a wonderful man? Did you say something to that effect?
I don't remember saying that to Mr. Jarecki.
So let me ask you something. Whether you remember saying it to Mr. Jarecki, is that your view of what happened and what you did? That you went on TV, putting your reputation on the line by saying he's a wonderful man?
I went on television saying what I felt about Bob. I don't necessarily think I put my reputation on the line.
So let me ask you something. If you had said words to the effect of, I put my reputation on the line by going on TV and saying he's a wonderful man, what would be your response?
I don't remember saying that I put my reputation on the line.
Was that request that you made pursuant to your husband and your alleged representation of Mr. Durst?
You know, I asked Mr. Durst the same way as I asked other attorneys that my husband worked with, as well as friends. That's why I'm having a hard time answering it, because I asked him.
Ma'am, let me ask again. You are aware you've been taught by your husband in the years that you worked for him, you've been taught about what are communications made in the course of a representation, correct?
Yes.
And you know that those statements, when confidential, cannot be repeated, correct?
Correct.
And you also are aware of the difference between, I would assume, a conversation regarding your husband's representation of a client and something that has nothing to do with that representation, correct?
Yes.
So my question would be, can you explain how asking Bob for a job for your son would relate to you and your husband's representation of Mr. Durst?
I can only answer you again the way I did a minute ago. I asked, my son was out of work. Okay. I asked lawyers that Stuart worked with. I asked friends that Stuart worked with. I asked a whole bunch of people, and I didn't distinguish, who those people were.
Now, I'm going to ask again. Let me ask a question before that. Ma'am, is Bob Durst, based on your experience, is he an intelligent person?
Yes.
If someone were to say, quote, Bob Durst is not really smart, would you agree?
No.
If someone were to say, Bob Durst is not clever, would you agree?
Clever?
Yes.
Yes, I would agree, yes.
Okay. In your experience, is Bob Durst a person who can feel emotion?
Yes.
Have you ever seen Bob Durst laugh?
Yes.
Have you ever seen Bob Durst express joy or happiness?
Yes.
If someone were to say, quote, emotion is very hard for him, he doesn't know what happy is, unquote, would you agree with that statement?
I think emotion is hard for him, but that doesn't mean I haven't seen him happy.
So you would agree he doesn't know what happy is?
Yes.
You've seen him happy, correct? In your experience, is Bob Durst able to relate to people?
It's hard.
Does Bob Durst have a good sense of humor?
What's your understanding, yes?
Would you agree he's got a biting wit, correct?
Yes.
Fair to say he can be not just funny, but very funny.
Yes.
Do you agree that Bob Durst also knows how to deliver a line?
time.
In your experience, has Bob Durst been able to establish close relationships with other people?
I think he has with my husband, he has with me.
Did he have a close relationship with anybody else that you observed?
I don't know. He did with his wife, Kathy.
Based on your observation of Bob Durst in his relationships, would you refer to him as controlling?
Not with me.
If Bob Durst were to refer to himself as controlling in his relationship, would you agree or disagree with that?
If he says that about himself, you know, he says that about himself.
So I'm asking, would you agree or disagree with it? I can say I'm really thin and handsome. I set you up. I love that. You take juice from that. So what I'm saying is I understand that you're referring to what Mr. Durst might say to himself. I'm asking you, based on what you've seen, if Bob Durst were to say, hey, listen, I'm controlling in my relationships, would that be consistent with your experience with it?
Not with my personal experience, no.
I'm not asking about his relationship with you. I'm saying, how have you seen him in relationships that you observed over the 40-plus years now?
It's hard to say. You know, you're asking me about 40-something years. It's a difficult question.
In your experience, is Bob Durst an honest person?
Most of the time.
Have you known Bob to lie when it's his advantage?
Yes.
When I mentioned Kathy Durst, can you tell me who that is?
Bob's former wife's first wife.
And how did you meet her?
My husband and I were dating, and Bob and Kathy were dating, and you know,
How often would the four of you guys socialize or get together?
not that often.
Now, would you see them once a month, once a week, once a year? How often did you see them?
Several times a year, maybe a couple of times, you know, maybe twice, maybe 8 times a year. Go back a while.
What was Kathy like? I already asked to describe her personality.
She was very sweet. She liked that her in the house and stuff.
Did you know Kathy when she was in medical school?
Not as much as before.
But you knew her at that point in life, correct?
Yeah.
Say yes? Was Kathy, based on your interactions with her, was she excited about becoming a doctor?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to see Bob and Kathy interact together?
Yes.
And how would you describe, if I were to ask you, how did Bob feel about Kathy based on your observations?
They were in love.
Have you ever said that Kathy was the love of his life?
Yes.
And would that be your opinion?
Yes.
At some point, did you see Bob and Kathy's relationship change, get worse?
When Kathy went to medical school, she was very, very much involved in her studies, and so their relationship wasn't quite as close. But when someone's in medical school, their personal relationships change.
You spoke to Dateline in June of 2015.
Yeah.
Did you recognize, oh, there he is. Did you recognize this man? Can you stand up, Mr. Dean? Did you recognize this man right here?
Yeah.
Who is that?
That's Robert Durst.
And how do you know Mr. Dean?
Mr. Dean was the producer of Dateline.
And you voluntarily spoke to Dateline, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to get to this issue in a little more detail, but I want to ask you, do you recall telling Dateline that, quote, she became more independent, it wasn't the fairy tale anymore?
She was more independent. She was in medical school. She was developing her own career, her own for someone.
So did you make that comment?
Yes.
And what did you mean by it wasn't a fairy tale anymore?
When Bob and Kathy got married, she was very young. And they were, terribly. And they were not Vermont, the hippie life for a while. And when she came back after she graduated nursing school, she was accepted as an overnight. And I think the relationship changed because she was older and more secure in her own person. And it wasn't really as much of a doting wife and complete support system as she was prior.
Did you watch the James?
Not all of them.
Have you watched the interviews that Bob Durst gave to Henry Director Mark Sperling pursuant to the James? Do you recall a part in the interview where Bob Durst was describing his relationship with Kathy and said in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, that they used to go out to dinner, I'm to his Bob Durst would go out to dinner, and I'd say, why don't you get one of these, and I'll get one of these, and we'll split them. And then Kathy got to the point where she didn't want to do that anymore. And she would look at me and say, you have your food, I have my food, leave my food alone. Do you recall that exchange?
It sounded something I heard. Not exactly, okay? I do,
Does that, I can do it in the voice too. So, Ms. Altman, is that an accurate depiction of, in essence, how the relationship had changed in terms of Kathy becoming more independent?
Yes, except that when my husband and I were first married, we shared food. Okay? Now he wouldn't eat what I ate if you forced him to. So it makes perfect sense to me that Kathy would say, I'm eating my food, you eat yours, because I do that.
Let me ask you something. Were you aware of whether Bob was unfaithful to Kathy?
At some point, yes.
Were you aware at the time that it was happening that he was unfaithful? Or is this something you learned years later?
I learned later.
And in terms of your opinion of Mr. Durst and who he is, did his infidelity change how you viewed him or who you thought he was as a person?
I'm trying to give you an honest answer to this point.
I definitely want, please, go on.
Let me try. I know that, Kathy was seeing other people, Bob was seeing other people, they both were seeing other people, so, it's not like one person was completely honest in the relationship and one wasn't, so.
Is it fair to say that the Bob Durst he is not above cheating on his spouse?
I know that when Bob was alone and Kathy was in school, he didn't like being alone all the time. We're cheating now.
Do you know when I say the name Prudence Farrow, do you know who that is?
Leah Farrow's sister.
Okay, and do you know Prudence Farrow in any other capacity than his Leah Farrow's sister?
I know that according to the press, Bob was seeing her.
Have you ever had any conversations with Bob Durst regarding Prudence Farrow?
No.
Were you aware that Bob Durst was seeing her near the time his wife disappeared?
Did you ask me at the time that he was seeing her doing that?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Wait a minute. Yeah, let's pause. Mr. Lynn, you may be seated.
Thank you. Ms. Altman, did you ever witness Robert Durst in any way emotionally abusive to Kathy? Did you ever see Bob Durst either hit, slap, or strike Kathy at any time? During the course of the relationship with Kathy, did Bob ever admit to you that he was physically violent?
No.
Prior to 2001, which is the year that your husband put in his declaration that the attorney-client relationship began, did Mr. Durst ever admit to you that he was physically violent with Kathy? Prior to 1995, did Mr. Durst ever admit to you that he had ever been physically violent with his wife? If in fact there were information that demonstrated that Mr. Durst was in fact physically violent with his wife, would your response be, that is not the Bob Durst I know? Now, I want you to assume, for the purposes of hypothetical, that Mr. Durst has admitted that he was physically violent with his wife, Kathy. So I'm going to ask you whether that happened. You're to assume it's true. Do you understand so far?
Yes.
Let me ask you, if I were to say to you, does that sound like the Bob Durst I know? What would be your response?
It doesn't sound like the Bob Durst I know. If he admitted it, okay, but I never saw it.
Okay, so my question then would be, ma'am, when you say it doesn't sound like the Bob Durst you know, if that turned out to be true, so assuming that hypothetical is correct, would it cause you to question whether or not you truly knew Mr. Durst?
Yes, it would make me uncomfortable.
That's not what
It would make me question.
it would make you question whether you know this guy, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall when the last time was you saw Kathy prior to her disappearance?
I think it was at my home, and I think she had Bob and Kathy brought this huge doll, straps on the feet, because my daughter was
Wait, what kind of, okay.
Right.
Scare me with this story for a second, okay? Go ahead, Ms. Owen.
Okay. Do you have a daughter? Well, all right. Little girls get these dolls sometimes. They're almost as big as they are. And there's like little, straps that they put on their feet and they walk around with the doll.
Okay.
Okay? Kathy brought that from my daughter.
Do you recall, if I were to tell you, if I were to ask you, do you know when Kathy disappeared?
1982.
Okay. Do you remember what month?
No.
If I were to tell you January 31st, 1982, does that sound about right? On or about, if I said Durst disappeared on or about January 31st, February 1st, etc., does that sound like the approximate time frame?
Yes.
So what I'm asking you is, if you can you remember, I don't suppose you remember the date, but this last time we saw Kathy with the doll, how long before she disappeared with that date?
Maybe a month or two.
And when you saw her, was there anything unusual about your interaction with her?
No, because, they were in my home with my kids.
Did you get excited about graduating from medical school? Do you remember if she mentioned anything about planning on taking off?
No, honestly, all I remember is the dog.
Had Kathy ever mentioned to you anything about running away or abandoning her life prior to her disappearance? At that time, when she disappeared, at another time, did you ask Bob Durst about the disappearance?
Bob called up.
Okay, and when did he call you?
I don't remember the exact day, but he said, have you seen Kathy? Because I haven't seen her.
And when he called you and he said, hey, have you seen Kathy? Did he make clear how long it was that she'd been missing? What was your response when he called and said, hey, have you seen Kathy? She's missing.
I know, we haven't, but if you will let me know, and, we'll call some hospitals to see if we can find anything.
When he called you, what was his demeanor?
He was concerned.
And did he tell you when he last seen her?
might have said a few days, but I don't remember exactly.
Well, ma'am, at that point in time, you considered Bob and Kathy Durst close friends, correct?
Yes.
Once you have asked him at that time and said, hey, Bob, my gosh, when's the last time you saw her? What happened? Did you ask some of those questions?
I probably did, but I also I was concerned enough to say, listen, we're going to call some hospitals and see what we can find out.
Did Bob ask you and your husband in your presence to help search for her?
To help search for her? Well, we said we call hospitals,
Well,
And then he said, okay, at one point he said, if you hear from her, let me know.
so ma'am, his wife, a close friend of yours, disappeared, and your response to that is, hey, if we'll call some hospitals. If you don't hear, just let us know.
That's not exactly it.
Well, tell me, so what I'm wondering is, what did you do when you hear that your close friend's wife has vanished? What do you do?
We called hospitals. I think we called Bob and said we haven't heard, let us know if we hear from them. And then there was some television show on a few days later where they had a live audience. And I remember calling Bob and saying, I think I see Kathleen in the audience. When I called and I gave him the name of the show. And I honestly don't remember hearing the show.
Do you recall Bob Durst asking you to help search for her?
No.
Did you offer?
Well, we said if there was anything we could do, let us know. But
Now, so what I'm asking is, your close friend's wife has disappeared, and I'm just trying to understand. You're telling me your response is, hey, let us know if we can help, if there's something.
because having issues right now. He called, he said, have you seen Kathy? And he really sounded friendly. We said, what happened? He said, I don't know. Do you know where she is? So I figured, God forbid something happened to her because she was in school. I thought, God forbid, I could buy a car. You never know. She was in Albert Einstein in the Bronx. Not the best neighborhood.
Did he tell you when the last time you'd seen her was?
You're asking me for the truth, and the truth is I don't remember.
Ma'am, are you telling me that over the past 36 years, 35 years actually, that you can't remember what Bob Durst told you about his missing wife?
I can answer you the best I can again. Bob called. He said, have you seen Kathy? And we said, no, is everything okay? He said, I haven't seen her. I don't remember. He said, how many days he hadn't seen her. I really don't remember.
Well, you said we'll call hospitals.
And I said, let's call some hospitals and see if something happened. Because that would be the first response.
Well, so I assume, ma'am, if you said I'll call hospitals, Bob told you where the hospitals you should be calling were.
No, I knew that Kathy went to Albert Einstein. I also knew they lived in Manhattan. So we called some hospitals in the Bronx, we called some hospitals in Manhattan, and she wasn't there.
Now, are you telling me that when Bob Durst called you, that he did not tell you that, you know what, the last time I saw her...
You've marked the place, Mr. Milius.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to resume 9 o'clock on Monday. Have a good, restful weekend. I know I enjoy my rest after 4 days of difficult testimony, so we all can use that refreshing weekend during that time that you are away from us. Don't talk about the case or about any of the people or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. Do not make up your mind about any issue until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. As always, no social media regarding the case, and do not form or express any opinion on the case. So with that, Department 1 is adjourned. We do have one juror remaining. Lewin?
Your Honor, I got a request from the defense. They wanted to try to extend, they asked about being dark on Monday. We did not address that. But
This coming up Monday? No, he's not saying that. Are you?
That was a text that I got. I told them that I didn't want to do that.
Mr. DeGuerin shaking his head no.
But it also brings up the issue of July 1st. And a concern that I have is that the defense has repeatedly stated that they have not had the time or the opportunity to prepare their client for cross-examination and for direct. They've had a year and a half, and my concern is that I know that the jail has been open for business, is now open for business. They can see him on the weekends, et cetera. And my concern is that what's going to happen is that they're going to come in and they're going to say, our client's not ready to testify. We need a recess. He can't do it. We haven't had time to prep him. And my concern is that I know they're going home. Mr. Chesnoff left today early. They go home every week on Thursday. And I just want to make sure that they understand that our position is going to be they've had years to get him ready. So
Yep.
I just want to make sure that that's clearly stated, because this is an issue that's going to come up again. It already has come up.
Yeah, I wouldn't be inclined to give any time at all before examination starts. There's no basis for it. But Mr. DeGuerin, it seems that Mr. Lewin misunderstood your request because you were shaking your head no.
Well, yeah, I didn't even, it wasn't me that made the request. I think it was Chip. But I knew by lunch that wasn't going to happen today. I mean.
All right, well, I think I should have rung the bell louder because I think I've got nothing to decide, and we have many miles before we sleep, and many miles before we sleep. Department 1 is again adjourned.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And promises to keep.
And thank you.